I'm Robert Treuer, and a proud veteran of World War II. And I served in the United States Army, and eventually overseas in the Philippines and briefly in Japan. I tried to enlist when I was 16 or turning 17, living in a small town in Ohio. And the village priest who was on the draft board says, we need your parents' approval because you're underage. Does your mother know you're here? And I said, well, no. He says, you think she would approve? And I hemmed and I hawed, and it was pretty obvious that she would not. And he says, I know you, Mom, and I'm not going to tangle with her. You come back when you turn 18. Well, it wasn't all that long before I finally turned 18, and they lost no time in gratifying my wish, and I entered the service. And that was in May '44. I went straight into infantry basic training.
Whereabouts?
And just about the time that our outfit was to ship overseas, I received orders to report to New Haven, Connecticut. I said, what for? And the company sarge said, you are going to language school. I didn't want to do that, but I had no choice in the matter. Apparently, at that time, when we entered the service, we were given IQ tests, and some of us who scored at a certain level were sent to language school because we did not have enough people who spoke Japanese. And the Army felt the need to train us. So my outfit went overseas into the Battle of the Bulge, and I didn't go with it. Instead, and we started out with a group of, I believe, 60, were sent to Yale University and put into a very intensive training program. Our instructors were American-born Japanese who had the language. And from morning until evening, we were in small groups of 5 or 6 or 7, and all we did was to speak Japanese, repeating after the instructor whatever he said. And he would point to objects and name them, and we had to repeat that after him over and over again until we had it just right. In an amazingly short period of time, we were talking Japanese amongst ourselves. It was a very effective program. eventually, when I did wind up in Japan, after I'd been in the Philippines, some of the Japanese people with whom I would talk commented, and they said, "You speak with a Tokyo accent."
Now, you were there during the occupation?
Yes, just briefly, just 2 or 3 months. That was didn't get to see much of the country. Didn't do any sightseeing, any of that. And at that time, most of the Japanese people, although whom we met or had dealings with, were not too happy with us. The country was devastated, flattened, bombed and burned wherever you went. And the people were starving. And where I was stationed, when I did wind up in Japan, we felt sorry for these women and children who obviously were starving. And you know what an American mess hall is like. We had so much food that we wasted. So we made it a practice, whatever food there was in the garbage cans, and we scrubbed them out. We sat out, and the word spread, and hundreds of people showed up for that food. It got to be pretty mob-like. So we raised up one of our guys on our shoulders, and he shouted out at this mob of people, "Tomare!" Stop. Ordered them to line up. And instantly, that mob became a silent, single line of starving people, taking their turn and sharing the food. That told us something about the mindset of the Japanese people we met, who, while starving, could obey instantly. I have had, ever since, very mixed feelings that I did not get to go with my outfit. But there was nothing I could do about it.
Where'd you go when you left Japan?
Then I came home. I'd spent quite a bit of time in the Philippines. I forget how many months there.
Let me go back to Japan. What was your job there while in Japan?
I was unassigned in Japan. In the Philippines, I was in intelligence. And I had dealings with Japanese prisoners of war, whom I found very cooperative, for the simple reason that I was an American GI who spoke Japanese. Most Americans they had dealings with would simply shout at them and point to indicate what they wanted them to do. And an American could talk to them. It's quite a novelty.
And then you left and you came back to the Philippines for how long?
I was in the Philippines better part of a year.
And what was your job there then?
Intelligence.
And what does that mean? You had to talk to the Japanese and get,
That wasn't part of my duties.
oh,
My duties were elsewhere. I talked to the Japanese prisoners of war with whom I had dealings. They staffed our motor pools, and I received excellent service from my Jeep.
what was your job to extract information even though the war was over?
No,
Oh,
not from the prisoners. By then they had nothing to offer that we needed to know.
mhm.
My job was otherwise.
Okay. So after the Philippines, then you came back to the States?
Then I came home.
Okay.
To a very young family. In short order, we had 3 children.
Mhm.
And
But then you were out of the service now.
out of the service. I did re-up when I was eligible for discharge. I re-upped for 1 year to stay in 1 year more. I was debating with myself whether I wanted to stay regular Army or not, and I decided with a young family and what have you, not to do that.
Somebody had mentioned to me once you had family in Europe that died during the war or something?
I was born and raised in Vienna, Austria,
Oh,
and I had no brothers or sisters, just my parents, and I escaped after the Germans moved in. I was only, how old was I then? 12. I did not understand the politics, but I understood what the occupation was all about. And of course, I saw things that you understood even at 12 years old. And my dad insisted that we get out. And I remember the first Sunday, they were arguing in the other room. They wouldn't let me in, but I could tell they were arguing. Mom didn't understand why we had to leave. And Dad laid it out for her. He said, under the German laws, anyone who had one Jewish grandparent was officially declared a Jew and therefore not eligible to go to school, not allowed to go to the public parks or any public place, etc., etc. And he predicted what would happen. Many of the rest of our relatives, uncles and aunts, were not convinced. But he got my mom, who was a piano teacher, to apply to an employment agency in England, and she got a job as a live-in housekeeper. You see, you couldn't get entry into another country, not England, not the United States, not most other countries, unless you had proof of employment. So you would not be a public burden. It was different back in those days. She got a job. I got a scholarship to a boarding school in England. Dad had to stay behind. Couldn't get out. He saw us off at the train station. And Mom and I took the train through Austria, through Germany, and at the German border with Belgium, all refugees were ordered off the train and surrounded by heavily armed stormtroopers, and the train pulled out and left. And Mom that day saved my life. She grabbed me by the arm and she just hissed at me, "Come." And we walked right between two guards and kept on walking. And went to the station restaurant, and she ordered coffee, the first cup of coffee I ever had. And the rest of the people disappeared. She was a tiny woman, blonde, blue-eyed, with a lot of presence of mind. And we waited for hours. Didn't have much money, so we didn't order anything else. And when the next train came, it seemed like forever. I wanted to jump up and run out and get on that train. And she sat there, stock still, and did not move. All of a sudden, she jumped up and says, "Come." And we ran out of that restaurant and were getting on the train as it started to move out. And 5 minutes later, we were in Belgium. Mom. My dad, I did not know where he was, what he did. I found out much later that he found work as an itinerant farm worker, going from farm to farm, getting a few days' work, always near the Czech border, so if he had to make a run for it, he could. Eventually, he had to go back to Vienna to get the documents to get out so he could join us. I was an adult before Dad ever told me what happened when he came back to Vienna and had to stand in line to get the papers and documents and so on. They refused to give him the exit documents until he had a physical exam. Now, don't ask me why somebody had to get a physical to leave the country. But he did, and they found he had a hernia. Said he could not leave until I was repaired. Checked in the hospital. They prepped him for the surgery and rolled him into the operating room, and the doctor began operating, and Dad began screaming, asking for anesthetic. And the doctor slapped down the scalpel and said, "No repair, no exit. What's it gonna be?" And he says, "Go ahead." So they proceeded with the surgery and he passed out. Mom and I were in England by then. By the time Dad got out and joined us, he looked like a ghost. I hardly recognized my own father. He recovered, but he didn't tell me about this until many years later.
Did you lose any family members in your relatives?
I'm sorry.
Did you lose any family members?
Yes. Most of my uncles and aunts and many cousins, I don't have an exact count. It's somewhere near 30. I have two cousins who escaped. One was a couple of years younger than I am, and her family was Catholic, had been, and they found a convent in Scotland that would take her in. So that cousin was put on what they called a kinder train, a children's train, where they let a whole train load of children out. And she spent the war years
Now you say let them out of where? Out of Germany?
out of Austria,
Austria.
Germany.
Okay.
She spent the war years in the convent. No idea where her parents were. And after the war, my parents were able to bring her over to this country, where she finished school, college, became a school teacher, married and had children.
How about your wife's parents? Did they get out?
I beg your pardon?
How about your wife's parents?
Oh, my wife is American.
Oh, okay. So they were here.
It was many years before my cousin ever found out what happened to her parents, because they disappeared without a trace. They wound up in concentration camp. Excuse me.
Yep. Did they get out of the camps?
They died.
Okay. Was she able to prove that? Does she know for sure then? Okay.
Years later, one of her sons, one of my cousin's sons, by then a grown man, and his wife took a trip to Europe. They found out that their grandparents had been rounded up and shipped to Poland, to a ghetto in Poland. From there, even though they were Catholic, that made no difference. They had Jewish grandparents. They were sent to a small camp, and along with the other prisoners, they were ordered to stand in line, remove all their clothing, men, women, children. And then march into the back of a semi-trailer. The doors were shut, the exhaust was piped into the trailer, they died. It was many years before we found out.
How did they find out? Did they find someone to talk to?
My cousin's son established contact with an attorney in Poland who had access to the German records, and the records showed what date they were placed in what apartment building, what date they were shipped to the extermination camp. And until then, of course, there was always that little bit of a thought. Maybe they survived, they don't know where we are, we don't know where they are. But of course, that did not happen. A lot of family, what family there was gone.
Thank you for allowing me to come to your house and listen to you.
Well, thank you. Proud to be a vet. Wished I had done more. It was not given to me to do more.
It's the luck of the draw. You just some people were in bad spots, some people were in good spots. They had no control over it.
Maybe I should be glad I did not wind up in the Battle of the Bulge. But part of me says, and has always said, that's where I should have been.
I think that's very normal. They call that a guilt complex,
Well,
which is normal.
that's where my outfit went. That's
Yeah, as it,
where I feel I should have been.
yeah. Well, it wasn't to be, and that's the way it is.
Yep.
Robert, thank you very much.
Thank you.